The planet HFY was a graveyard of failed expeditions. Acid storms burned through metal, gravity crushed even the strongest bones, and monstrous creatures hunted anything that moved. The Typharian scientists had studied this world for decades, but they all agreed on one fact: no intelligent species could survive here. Yet today, a human was about to step onto its surface. Dr. Velquar watched from the reinforced observation room inside the research station. His smooth violet skin twitched as he adjusted his neural scanner. Around him, his team of scientists whispered nervously, their four-fingered hands tapping at holographic screens. "This is a mistake," one of them muttered. "The human will die within minutes." Velquar remained silent. He had studied humans before, primitive creatures from a death world called Earth. Their survival instincts were strong, but this was suicide. The doors to the airlock hissed open. Commander Raylan Cole stepped out onto the surface of HFY. A wave of heat blasted against his suit, the temperature high enough to boil liquid nitrogen. The ground beneath him cracked and shifted, barely stable. His breathing remained calm. His helmet visor darkened slightly, adjusting to the harsh sunlight. The scientists held their breath. Any second now, the planet would claim another victim. But the human did not collapse. Instead, he took a slow, steady step forward. Then another. Velquar's fingers tightened around the edge of the control panel. "Impossible," he whispered. Raylan scanned the landscape with sharp eyes. He crouched and ran his gloved fingers over the blackened rocks. A thin smirk crossed his lips. "This isn't so bad," he muttered. Inside the observation room, the scientists exchanged looks of disbelief. The gravity here was nearly twice that of Earth. Any normal species would struggle to move. Even the Typharians, who had advanced bioenhancements, found it difficult. But Raylan, he moved as if he was taking a walk in his backyard. A warning siren blared across the station. "Storm approaching." A technician shouted, "ETA, 3 minutes." Velquar's chest tightened. The acid storms of HFY were legendary. They could strip flesh from bone in seconds. The research station's shields barely held against them. "Bring him back inside," another scientist said urgently. Velquar opened his communicator. "Human, return to the station. Now." Raylan ignored the order. Instead, he pulled a small blade from his belt and sliced a piece of his own suit. Gasps filled the room, and he lost his mind. The wind howled as dark clouds gathered in the sky. Thick, greenish-black rain began to fall, sizzling as it hit the ground. Velquar's throat dried. That was it. The human was finished. But Raylan simply held out his arm, letting the acidic rain drip onto his exposed skin. The scientists recoiled. The acid should have melted through muscle and bone in seconds. But it didn't. Instead, it beaded up on his skin like harmless water. Inside the station, Velquar's mind raced. How? That level of resistance is biologically impossible. Raylan flicked the droplets away and nodded to himself. "Not too bad. I've had worse." Lightning cracked across the sky. The wind picked up speed, howling like a hungry beast. The storm was about to hit full force. Still, Raylan didn't move. Instead, he pulled a small device from his belt and stabbed it into the ground. A blue light pulsed from its core, scanning the terrain. A few seconds later, his communicator crackled. "Found shelter," he said, voice calm. 2 clicks north." The scientists stared in disbelief. Their own geologists had spent years trying to find stable ground on HFY. This human had done it in seconds. Velquar's fingers trembled. This wasn't natural. This wasn't possible. Raylan turned toward the station and smirked. "You coming, or what?" The screen flickered. The storm swallowed him whole. And then, radio silence. Inside the station, no one spoke. Dr. Velquar felt something he had never felt before. Fear. The human was still alive. and he was only getting started. A deadly storm raged across HFY, swallowing everything in a whirl of acid rain and violent winds. Inside the reinforced research station, Dr. Velquar and his team watched in horror. The human, Commander Raylan Cole, had just walked straight into the storm, without hesitation. No protective shield, no advanced armor, just his earthborn instincts and a smirk that still haunted Velquar's mind. "This is madness," one of the scientists whispered. "No species can survive that." Velquar's neural scanner beeped rapidly, tracking Raylan's vitals. Heart rate steady, oxygen levels normal. Somehow, the human was still alive. Velquar clenched his jaw. He had seen battle-hardened warriors crushed by this planet's conditions. He had studied species that were resistant to extreme environments. But this was something else. Then, through the thick clouds and acid rain, a figure emerged. Raylan Cole, untouched. Velquar's fingers twitched as he adjusted the scanner. He expected to see burns, injuries, something. Instead, the human skin remained intact. His suit had barely deteriorated. But the most disturbing part, Raylan wasn't even out of breath. He reached the station doors, tapped his wrist communicator, and said casually, "All right, you gonna let me in, or do I have to stand out here all night?" The scientists froze. This was impossible. The acid should have eaten through his flesh. The gravity should have slowed his movements. The wind should have torn him apart. Instead, he was grinning. Velquar hesitated before finally unlocking the entrance. The airlock hissed open, and Raylan stepped inside, shaking off the greenish-black droplets like they were just raindrops from a mild storm. "Not the worst weather I've seen," Raylan said, stretching his arms. "Bit breezy, though." Velquar's mind raced. His team stared at their monitors, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. One of the assistants finally broke the silence. How did you do that?" Raylan tilted his head, as if the question was ridiculous. "Do what?" "Survive," the assistant blurted out. "The acid rain should have burned you. The gravity should have weakened you. The storm." Raylan simply shrugged. "Earth's got worse places. You ever been to Antarctica? Try camping there in a blizzard." Velquar's throat tightened. The Cypherian Council had warned him about humans. They were labeled as Deathworlders, a species raised in one of the most hostile environments in the galaxy. But now he was beginning to realize something terrifying. The Council had underestimated them. His voice came out quieter than he intended. You adapted instantly." Raylan chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, I just figured it out." Velquar narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Raylan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "See, you guys study planets from a distance. You run simulations. You make theories. But humans..." He tapped his own chest. "We just go in and figure it out firsthand." Silence filled the room. Velquar's heart pounded. No species worked like that. None. A species shouldn't be able to walk into an unknown lethal environment and instantly adapt to it. But humans could. Velquar's hands trembled as he recorded his notes. The Deathworlders were not just tough. They were unstoppable. And for the first time in his career, Dr. Velquar was truly afraid. Dr. Velquar could barely process what he had witnessed. The human, Commander Raylan Cole, had walked through a lethal storm, shrugged off acid rain, and barely reacted to the crushing gravity of HFY. And now he was walking into the hunting grounds. Velquar and his team watched in tense silence from the research station's monitors as Raylan strode toward the Scared Valley, a region known for its apex predators. The Malakar, a towering 10-foot monstrosity with razor-sharp mandibles, bone-plated armor, and speed that outmatched every known species. It was the undisputed ruler of HFY. Even Cypherian war machines had fallen to its ambush tactics. And yet Raylan was walking straight into its territory. "This is suicide," one scientist whispered. Even with weapons, he wouldn't stand a chance. Velcor remained silent, his fingers gripping the edge of the console. Raylan was unarmed. No rifle, no advanced tech, just his instincts. The screen flickered. The scanners pinged violently. The Malachar had found him. The hunt begins. A deep, bone-rattling growl echoed through the valley. The shadows shifted, revealing a Malachar stalking the human. Velcor's breath caught in his throat. The Malachar was moving with terrifying precision, keeping low to the ground, its 6 clawed limbs barely making the sound. Raylan did nothing. He didn't run, didn't hide. He just kept walking. The Malakar's eyes locked onto him, sensing no fear, no hesitation, only confidence. Then, without warning, it attacked. The beast lunged, its massive body covering the distance in a split second. Its mandibles snapped, aiming to crush Raylan in one bite. Velcor flinched, expecting to see the human torn apart. But at the very last moment, Raylan moved. A simple step to the side. A perfectly timed dodge. The Malakar's massive body slammed into the ground, its own momentum working against it. Raylan stood just inches away, completely unarmed. "Did you see that?" One scientist gasped. He anticipated the attack before it happened. Velcor leaned forward, his mind racing. No species had ever dodged a Malakar's ambush. Even his own elite soldiers had failed to react in time. But Raylan, he made it look easy. Turning the hunt around, the Malachar growled in frustration, its massive claws tearing into the ground as it turned to attack again. But something was different now. It wasn't hunting anymore. It was confused. Raylan circled it slowly, studying it. His movements were calm, controlled, deliberate. He wasn't panicking. He was analyzing. The Malachar lunged again. Raylan ducked. Its claws swiped, missed. It tried to bite. Raylan dodged. Every movement was effortless, like he had seen this exact fight 1,000 times before. Velcor's stomach tightened. No, it wasn't instinct. The human was learning. And then the unthinkable happened. Raylan counterattacked. The Deathworlder strikes. Velcor barely had time to process what happened next. Raylan, still unarmed, suddenly lunged forward. His hands gripped the Malakar's exposed throat, where the armor was weakest. With a swift, brutal twist, he flipped the massive beast onto its back. The Malachar screeched, thrashing wildly. But Raylan had already moved, grabbing a jagged rock from the ground. And in one swift motion, he drove it into the creature's skull. Silence. The Malachar twitched once. Then it went still. Raylan stood over the body, breathing evenly. His expression completely calm. Inside the station, no one spoke. One of the scientists finally whispered, "He killed it with a rock." Velcor's hands were shaking. His neural scanner showed something terrifying. During the entire fight, Raylan's heart rate never spiked. He was never afraid, never panicked, never considered losing. Velcor swallowed hard. This wasn't just survival. This was domination. The Malachar had never been the predator. Raylan was. And for the first time, Velcor realized something horrifying. The most dangerous creature on Cipher 7 was not the Malachar. It was the Deathworlder. The research station was silent. Every scientist in the room stared at the screen, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Commander Raylan Cole, an unarmed human, had just killed a Malachar, the apex predator of Cipher 7, using nothing but his bare hands and a rock. Velcor's fingers trembled as he adjusted the neural scanner. No spike in adrenaline, no panic, no hesitation. Raylan had fought with the cold precision of a creature that belonged at the top of the food chain. Velcor had always believed humans were an anomaly, a strange, reckless species that defied logic. But now he understood the truth. They weren't reckless. They were built for this. The aftermath. Raylan stood over the Malakar's corpse, wiping the sweat from his brow. The wind howled around him, carrying the scent of blood and acid rain. He looked down at his makeshift weapon, a jagged rock, now stained with the creature's dark, viscous blood. He chuckled. Guess I still got it. Then he activated his communicator. You see all that, Doc? He said casually, as if he had just finished a morning workout. Inside the station, Velcor snapped out of his trance. He quickly unmuted the comms. Human, you just killed a big ugly thing. Yeah, I noticed, Raylan interrupted, stretching his arms. Thing was fast, but not fast enough. Velcor exchanged nervous glances with his team. The Malakar wasn't just fast. It was designed to hunt, to kill, to crush anything weaker than itself. Yet Raylan had treated it like a challenge. Not a threat. Not a predator. A puzzle to be solved. Velcor forced himself to remain calm. You should return to the station immediately. Raylan smirked. Nah, I'm just getting started. And then he did something that sent a chill down Velcor's spine. He crouched over the Malakar's body and started examining it, studying the enemy. Velcor watched in stunned silence as Raylan ran his fingers over the creature's exoskeleton, testing its strength. He pressed his boot against its claws, nodding to himself. He pried open its jaws, studying the mandibles. Raylan wasn't just looking at his kill. He was learning. He's studying its weaknesses, one of the scientists muttered. Velcor's throat went dry. He's adapting. Raylan turned the creature's head slightly, then glanced up at the cliffside nearby. Yeah, he muttered to himself. That would work. Velcor frowned. Human, what are you planning? Raylan grinned at the communicator. Oh, nothing. Just thinking of a way to take down a bigger one if I run into it. Velcor stiffened. Bigger one. The scientists froze. One of them turned pale. Oh no, he doesn't know. Velcor's stomach dropped. Human, he said quickly, listen to me. You must return to the station right now. Raylan raised an eyebrow. Why? Something I should be worried about. The scanners blared. Velcor's breath hitched. Something massive was moving. A shadow loomed behind Raylan, emerging from the mist-covered ridge. The Alpha Malakar, nearly twice the size of the first, heavily armored, smarter, more ruthless. Velcor's voice was tight with fear. Raylan, behind you. The human slowly turned his head. Then, instead of running, he smiled. Now this, Raylan muttered, cracking his knuckles, is gonna be fun. The ground trembled. The research station scanners blared warnings. Velcor and his team watched in frozen horror as the Alpha Malakar stepped forward, its massive bone-plated body emerging from the mist. It was nearly twice the size of the first. Its exoskeleton was thicker, reinforced from countless battles. Scars covered its dark hide, proof that nothing had ever bested it. Yet, standing in front of this nightmare, Raylan Cole smiled. Velcor's breath caught in his throat. Why wasn't the human afraid? The Alpha snarled, its 4 crimson eyes locking onto Raylan. It had seen what happened to its kin. It knew this creature, this human, was dangerous. But it wasn't going to run. No, it was going to tear him apart. A predator's patience. Raylan didn't move. He simply watched. Every twitch, every shift in the Alpha's stance. The Malakar was waiting, testing him. Smart, Raylan muttered under his breath. You're not like the last one. He rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck. But neither am I. Velcor's claws dug into the console. Raylan, you must retreat. This is not a fight you can win. Raylan tilted his head slightly. You sure about that, Doc? Velcor felt an unfamiliar sensation creep into his chest. Doubt. Was he sure? Every species that had faced the Alpha Malachar had perished, but none of them were human. None of them were Raylan Cole. The first move. A gust of wind swept through the valley. And then, the Alpha charged. Velquar barely had time to react before the beast crossed the distance in a blink, its massive claws slashing downward. Raylan dodged. Not just barely. Not by luck. Perfectly. He sidestepped at the last second, the Alpha's claws slamming into the ground where he had just been. Velquar's team gasped. He predicted the attack. The Alpha recoiled, its massive form twisting to swipe again. Raylan ducked. Another attack. Raylan spun away. A third. A feint. The Alpha tried to outsmart him, shifting its weight suddenly to catch him off guard. But Raylan was already one step ahead. Velquar's mind raced. This wasn't random. This wasn't instinct. Raylan was reading it, analyzing its movement patterns in real time. And then, for the first time in its life, the Alpha hesitated. Raylan grinned. Yeah, that's what I thought. The counterattack. Velquar's heart pounded. The human had done the impossible. He had forced an apex predator to second-guess itself. Raylan shifted his stance slightly, his weight lowering. He was going on the offensive. Then, before the Alpha could recover, Raylan sprinted forward. The scientists gasped. No, he's charging at it. Velquar's mind screamed that this was madness. Charging at a creature 5 times his size was suicide. But Raylan wasn't just charging. He was closing the distance. The Malachar's greatest strength was its range, its claws, its speed, its reach. By getting in close, Raylan was taking that advantage away. Velquar had never seen anything like it. Raylan wasn't fighting like prey. He was fighting like a predator. The Alpha lashed out. Raylan slipped under its arm. It tried to pivot. He was already behind it. Then, in a single fluid motion, Raylan leaped onto the creature's back. Velquar's eyes widened. No, that's impossible. But it was real. Raylan had scaled the beast, climbed up its thick armor plates, and reached the base of its skull. One hand grabbed onto its spine ridge. The other reached for his makeshift weapon, a sharpened bone fragment from the first Malachar he killed. And then, with a sharp, brutal movement, he drove it deep into the Alpha's brainstem. The Deathworlder stands victorious. The Alpha screamed. Its entire body convulsed. It staggered, limbs twitching violently as its own nervous system betrayed it. The beast's legs buckled. Then, it collapsed. The impact shook the ground. Dust rose, and in the aftermath, Raylan Cole stood atop its lifeless body. He let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. Now that was a workout. Inside the station, no one spoke. Velquar felt his hands trembling. His scanners confirmed it. The Alpha Malachar was dead. Raylan had just slaughtered the strongest predator on Cipher 7, with nothing but his mind, his reflexes, and a weapon he made himself. Velquar exhaled shakily. This wasn't just survival. This was dominance. This was Deathworlder instinct. Raylan activated his communicator. Hey, Doc. Velquar swallowed. Why, yes. Raylan chuckled. So, you still think I should have run? Velquar couldn't answer. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. The dust settled. The massive corpse of the Alpha Malachar lay still beneath Raylan's feet. Its once dominant presence, its terrifying speed and strength, none of it had been enough. Raylan had won. Inside the research station, no one spoke. Velquar gripped the console so tightly his claws ached. His team of scientists sat frozen, their minds unable to process what had just happened. This isn't possible, one of them whispered. He didn't just survive. He adapted. Another scientist turned to Velquar, his eyes wide with disbelief. What have we done, sir? Velcor understood the fear in his subordinate's voice, because for the first time, he shared it. They had believed themselves to be the superior species, the scholars, the observers. But this was something else. The Deathworlder had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The truth revealed. Raylan stretched, rolling his shoulders. Damn, that was a good fight. He crouched beside the Alpha's corpse, placing his hand against its thick armor plates. Tougher than the last one, but too slow. Velcor finally found his voice. Human, you should not be alive. Raylan smirked. Well, I am. So, what does that tell you? Velcor swallowed hard. He had studied thousands of species in his career. Every life form followed a pattern, evolutionary logic. Survival, adaptation, fear. But humans, they were something unnatural. Velcor exhaled. It tells me that we have greatly underestimated you. Raylan chuckled. Yeah, most do. Velcor hesitated before speaking again. Tell me, were you ever afraid? Raylan paused. For a moment, his expression was unreadable. Then he said, quietly, but firmly, no. Velcor's stomach twisted. No fear, no hesitation. This was not normal. It was terrifying. And that's when it hit him. Cypher 7 wasn't testing Raylan. Raylan was testing Cypher 7. The others are watching. A sudden alert flashed on the station's scanners. Velcor frowned and turned to his team. Report. One of the scientists frantically checked the readings. Sir, we're detecting movement. Velcor's blood ran cold. More Malakars. No, sir. These aren't Malakars. These are ships. Silence. Velcor's mandibles clicked nervously. Whose ships? The scientist's voice was barely above a whisper. All of them. Velcor's mind raced. It couldn't be. He rushed to the display, eyes scanning the data. It was true. Multiple alien fleets were now in orbit above Cypher 7. The Xifarians, the Othari, the Valquin Dominion, even the warlike Krissic brood. They had all come. They had all witnessed what Raylan had done. And now, they'd wanted to know more. Velcor felt his throat tighten. Raylan Cole hadn't just killed an Alpha Malakar. He had shattered the balance of power in the galaxy. The human problem. Velcor turned back to the screen. Raylan stood alone on the battlefield, oblivious to what was happening above him. He had fought because it was in his nature, because he didn't know how to be anything else. Velcor felt a cold realization settle in his chest. This is why humans are feared. They didn't conquer through numbers or technology. They conquered through persistence, intelligence, and the absolute refusal to break. Velcor turned to his team. His voice was tight. Prepare a transmission to High Command. Sir? Velcor's hands trembled. We need to make a decision. About what? Velcor exhaled. Whether to recruit him or eliminate him before it's too late. Raylan stood over the Alpha Malakar's corpse, wiping the sweat from his brow. His muscles ached, his clothes were torn, but his grin never faded. Not bad, he muttered to himself. Above him, hidden beyond the clouds, an entire fleet of alien ships watched in silence. Inside the research station, Velcor's team remained motionless, eyes locked onto the data streams. They had expected to witness a human death. Instead, they had witnessed a revelation. And now, the entire galaxy was watching. The fear of the unknown. Velcor's claws trembled as he sent a secure transmission to High Command. What do we do? The response came within seconds. Contain him. Velcor inhaled sharply. They fear him, he whispered. His assistant, Yelka, hesitated. Sir, perhaps we should too. Velcor's gaze flicked back to Raylan. The human had no idea what was happening. He was alone on the planet, surrounded by the corpses of creatures that should have killed him, and he was winning. Velcor swallowed. No, we must decide carefully. If we move against him and fail, his voice trailed off, because deep down he knew, if we fail, humans will remember, and humans never forget. The incoming message, a sudden ping echoed through the research station. Velcor stiffened. What now? One of the technicians gasped. Sir, we're receiving a direct hail. Velcor frowned. From who? The technician swallowed hard. From the Terran High Command. The room fell into absolute silence. Velcor's throat went dry. Humans were not supposed to know about this experiment. They were not supposed to be watching. And yet, they were already here. Velcor exhaled sharply. Put it through. The holoscreen flickered, revealing a cold, expressionless human officer. He was old, battle-worn. His uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Dominion, the largest and most feared human military force in the galaxy. His gaze was like steel. Dr. Velcor, the human said, we need to talk. Velcor felt his mandibles twitch. About what? The human's voice was calm, but beneath it was something far worse than anger. Absolute certainty. About your research on Cipher 7. Velcor's heart pounded. They knew. They had always known. And now, they were here to make sure the galaxy never forgot. The Deathworlder's message. Velcor swallowed, forcing himself to speak. This is a misunderstanding. The Terran officer tilted his head slightly. Is it? Velcor hesitated. What do they know? How much? The officer leaned forward. Listen carefully, Doctor. His voice never wavered. You put a human on a hostile death world. You studied him like an experiment, and you expected him to die. Velcor said nothing. The officer's gaze hardened. But now, you've seen the truth. He leaned in slightly. So let me make this simple for you. His next words sent a cold chill through the entire station. If anything happens to Raylan Cole, we will glass your world. Velcor's breath hitched. The scientists around him froze in terror. They had miscalculated. They had pushed too far. And now, the Deathworlders were speaking. The human stands alone. Far below, Raylan stretched, adjusting his communicator. Hey, Doc. Velcor barely found his voice. Why, yes. Raylan smirked. So when do I get a real challenge? Velcor stared at him. Raylan had no idea how much had changed in the last few minutes, how he had shaken the balance of power across the galaxy. Velcor swallowed hard. Soon, human. Very soon. Raylan's grin widened. Good. Above him, the warships waited. And in that moment, Velcor realized something. The galaxy had been afraid of the wrong species all along.